So most people buy running shoes or, sign up for a gym membership for one primary reason. They want to lose weight. But the science actually says if you start a running routine today and you don't change a single thing about your diet, you will lose a maximum of maybe 4 to 6 pounds total.
Yeah, it is. It's the single most persistent misconception in modern health. And really, it's why millions of people quit their routines after just a few months.
Right, because they aren't seeing the results.
Exactly. They're looking at a metric that exercise simply wasn't designed to drastically change.
Well, welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we are bringing you a massive stack of sources. We've got a sweeping systematic review by the European Association for the Study of Obesity, deep dive analyses on behavioral psychology, and even some practical movement guides.
A lot of ground to cover.
It is. And our mission for you today, we want to shortcut your journey to being truly comprehensively well-informed about what exercise actually does to the human body. We're cutting through all those, scale-obsessed myths and giving you an evidence-based blueprint for a sustainable routine.
And to do that, honestly, we have to completely shatter your expectations of calorie burning.
So let's just jump right into it.
Right. So the clinical data from the ESO review lays this out with brutal clarity. When individuals begin an aerobic training program, so walking, cycling, jogging, without a caloric deficit, the average resulting weight loss is only 2 to 3 kilograms.
2 to 3 kilograms. Wow.
Yeah, and that directly corresponds to 2 to 3 kilograms of body fat loss. I mean, it is real fat, not just water weight, but the sheer magnitude is incredibly modest.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to the average listener, that is a wildly discouraging number for the sheer amount of sweat and effort they're putting in, right?
Oh, absolutely. It sounds like a terrible deal.
I think there's a huge cultural tendency to treat exercise as this magic eraser. Like if I go out and eat a massive pizza on Friday night, I can just, run it off on Saturday morning.
The old out-train a bad diet mentality.
Exactly. But this data essentially proves the magic eraser is a total myth. Exercise is more of a fine-tuning dial.
Fine-tuning dial perfectly captures the biological reality, actually. And the data remains remarkably consistent across different interventions. Like if you look at aerobic exercise compared to resistance training, aerobic work yields about 1 kilogram more weight loss.
Okay, so a tiny bit better for the scale.
Right. But the real perspective shift happens when you look at combined interventions. If you combine a strict weight loss diet with an aerobic exercise program, you only lose about 1.5 kilograms of extra total fat compared to someone doing the diet entirely alone.
Wait, really? Only 1.5 kilos extra, which means the diet is doing the heavy lifting for the bathroom scale. The kitchen drives the weight, and the gym drives something else entirely. I mean, even looking at the bariatric surgery data in the sources, where patients have literally had their digestive anatomy altered, adding a rigorous post-surgery exercise program only yields an average of 2.5 kilograms of additional fat loss.
Yeah, it's a really modest addition to what is a massive surgical and dietary intervention. The human body is just remarkably efficient at conserving energy, which is why trying to out-train a caloric surplus is just a mathematical impossibility for almost everyone.
I have to admit, seeing those numbers makes me want to push back a little bit.
Fair enough.
Because if I'm only losing 2 kilos, so like 4 or 5 pounds, why on earth am I torturing myself on a stair stepper every week? If the scale refuses to budge, why am I putting myself through the physical discomfort of waking up at 6 a.m. to go for a run?
Yeah.
It just feels like a terrible return on investment.
What's fascinating here is that you are only calculating your return on investment based on what you can see in the mirror.
Okay, fair point.
Right. The primary biological goal of exercise isn't aesthetic. It is cardiometabolic. So to understand the true value of that 6 a.m. run, you have to look past the subcutaneous fat, the fat you can pinch on your arms or thighs.
Then look where?
You have to look deep inside the abdominal cavity.
Oh, you're talking about visceral fat, the invisible padding around the organs.
Exactly.
I always picture visceral fat as this toxic bubble wrap suffocating your liver, your pancreas, and your intestines.
Yeah.
It's not just sitting there inert, right? It's actively releasing inflammatory cytokines into your bloodstream.
And that is exactly where aerobic exercise performs its most crucial work. Visceral fat is metabolically dangerous, yes, but it is also highly responsive to catecholamines.
Which are hormones, right? Like adrenaline.
Yeah, hormones like adrenaline and noradrenaline. So when you do aerobic exercise or high-intensity interval training, your body floods your system with these hormones. And visceral fat cells actually have a really high density of receptors for catecholamines.
So they're basically primed to react to the workout.
Exactly. So when you elevate your heart rate, you are literally sending a chemical signal that unlocks those visceral fat cells, forcing them to dump their stored energy into the bloodstream to be burned.
So the aerobic exercise acts like a pin, popping and melting away that toxic bubble wrap, even if the visible fat on the outside of your body stays exactly the same.
Yep, the scale might not move an inch.
That's incredible. You can have someone who is objectively heavy on the scale, but because they jog 3 times a week, their internal organs are swimming in clean water instead of toxic sludge.
That internal cleanup extends directly into the organs themselves, too. Specifically, it reduces intrahepatic fat, the fat physically lodged inside your liver.
And a fatty liver is a big problem.
It's the vanguard of severe metabolic dysfunction. Aerobic work clears that out. It fundamentally changes the cellular environment.
The sources also detail some pretty dramatic shifts in blood pressure, but the raw numbers sound almost negligible at first glance.
They do, yeah.
Like, they cite an average reduction in systolic blood pressure of 3 millimeters of mercury and 2 millimeters for diastolic. To a layperson, dropping your blood pressure from 130 to 127 sounds like a rounding error. Why is that significant?
Well, because cardiovascular health compounds over time. A 3-millimeter drop in systolic blood pressure might sound totally invisible, but at a population level, a reduction of that size translates to roughly a 10 to 14% decrease in stroke mortality.
Wow.
And a significant drop in the risk of fatal coronary heart disease. It takes the physical pressure off the endothelial lining of your blood vessels 24 hours a day, 7 days a week.
It's taking the foot off the accelerator of vascular damage.
Exactly.
And the insulin response works in a similar invisible way, right? The data shows insulin sensitivity improves across all types of exercise, even for individuals already managing type 2 diabetes.
Yeah, to understand why, we have to look at the cellular level. When your muscles contract during exercise, they require immediate energy. This physical contraction causes glucose transporters, specifically the GLUT4 proteins, to move to the surface of the muscle cells.
So they're reaching out for fuel.
They essentially open the doors to pull sugar out of your bloodstream, completely independent of insulin.
Oh, that's huge.
It is. Over time, your cells become generally more receptive to the insulin your body does produce, meaning your engine runs cooler and cleaner. You require less hormone to do the exact same amount of metabolic work.
Which brings up the intensity question.
Yeah.
Because the sources heavily feature HIIT, high-intensity interval training, as this, incredible mechanism for boosting VO2 max and rapidly melting that visceral fat.
It's very effective, yes.
But the European Association for the Study of Obesity issues a very prominent warning about it.
They absolutely do, and it cannot be ignored. Look, HIIT demands an extreme, sudden cardiac output. For adults with overweight or obesity, or, those who have been habitually inactive, jumping straight into Axia without a thorough cardiovascular risk assessment and medical supervision is dangerous.
This is just too much stress too fast.
Right. The sheer volume of blood the heart is suddenly required to pump can expose underlying vulnerabilities. You don't want to mess around with that.
So you don't need to sprint until you throw up to get the benefits. The biggest leap in saving your own life, mathematically, happens the moment you transition from being completely inactive to simply moderately active.
That is the single steepest drop in all-cause mortality across all the epidemiological data. The moment you get off the couch and start moving consistently, your internal chemistry improves, regardless of whether that piece of plastic on your bathroom floor registers a difference.
Okay, so we know aerobic exercise is the chemical trigger that melts visceral fat, clears out the liver, and drops blood pressure. But the sources are equally clear that if you only do cardio, you are leaving yourself incredibly vulnerable. Resistance training is framed as completely non-negotiable. Why is that?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, we have to look at what happens when someone finally does alter their diet to lose weight.
Right, creating that caloric deficit.
Exactly. When you restrict calories, your body is suddenly facing an energy deficit.
Yeah.
It doesn't just cheerfully burn away your fat stores, it evaluates all its tissues, and muscle is metabolically expensive tissue. It burns calories just existing.
So it's a liability in a famine.
Exactly. So in a deficit, the body's natural survival mechanism is to break down that lean body mass to save energy and harvest amino acids.
It essentially starts eating its own engine to survive the famine. That is terrifying.
And this is where resistance training becomes critical. Doing moderate to high-intensity resistance work sends a mechanical and biological signal to your central nervous system.
Like an override switch.
Yes, it tells the body, hey, we are actively using this muscle to survive. Physical loads do not break it down. The ESO review is definitive on this. Aerobic exercise alone will not preserve your lean body mass during a weight loss diet. You strictly require the mechanical tension of resistance training to save your muscles.
So what does this all mean? If I can use an analogy here, building your fitness is kind of like building a house.
Okay, I like that.
Aerobic exercise is your plumbing and your electrical work. It's the invisible systems running behind the walls, your heart, your vascular system, your liver, keeping the water flowing and the lights on. It keeps the house functional.
Right.
But resistance training is the physical framing of the house. It's the load-bearing walls, the foundation, the joists.
That's a great way to put it, because if you invest purely in world-class plumbing but allow the wooden framing to rot, the house will eventually collapse under its own weight. Resistance training provides the structural integrity to carry the cardiovascular engine.
And it's also the only way to actually increase muscular strength. I think a lot of people conflate the two, thinking a brisk walk makes their legs stronger.
It doesn't. Cardio gives your legs endurance, the ability to repeat a submaximal contraction thousands of times. Lifting weights actually increases the maximum load the physical structure can bear.
Which culminates in what the researchers call combined training.
Yes. When you administer an exercise cocktail of aerobic work paired with resistance training, you see the absolute highest improvements in the physical components of overall quality of life.
Best of both worlds.
Exactly. You have the aerobic capacity to walk up 3 flights of stairs without losing your breath, and the physical strength to carry heavy bags of groceries while you do it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because we built this optimal, science-backed exercise cocktail. But the moment you tell someone to do 45 minutes of cardio and then lift weights, the immediate psychological hurdle is the appetite paradox.
Ah, yes. The fear of the post-workout binge.
Exactly. The fear is, if I burn all this energy, won't I just become ravenously hungry and eat everything in my pantry?
It's the most common behavioral fear associated with starting a routine. People assume their hunger will scale linearly with their calorie burn, but the biological evidence proves that exercise does not substantially increase your average daily calorie intake. The human appetite system is much more nuanced than a simple math equation.
I think everyone listening has fallen victim to the I earned this donut mentality at some point. You go for a really hard run, you feel that endorphin rush, your fitness tracker says you burned 400 calories, so your brain immediately rationalizes eating a 500-calorie pastry.
We've all been there. But that is a psychological hedonic justification. It is not a biological homeostatic drive.
Wait, what's the difference?
Homeostatic hunger is your body's actual physiological need for fuel. Hedonic eating is eating for pleasure and reward. Biologically, the research shows that consistent exercise might cause a very slight increase in your fasting hunger, so you might wake up feeling a bit more empty in your stomach before breakfast.
Okay, that makes sense.
But the real magic happens after you start eating. Exercise actually improves the sensitivity of your satiety signals.
Meaning the physiological cues that tell your brain, stop, we have enough food now. How does a workout change that?
It recalibrates your gut hormones. Acute exercise suppresses acylated ghrelin, which is the primary hormone responsible for making you feel hungry.
So it turns down the hunger hormone.
Yes, and simultaneously it elevates hormones like peptide YY and GLP-1, which signal fullness to the brain. So when you sit down for a meal after a period of consistent training, your brain receives a much louder, clearer signal that you are full, and it happens earlier in the meal.
And the sources mentioned it also dampens the hedonic response to food. That is wild to me. Working out physically alters how your brain's dopamine and reward pathways respond to a hyperpalatable food, like, say, a box of cookies.
It does. You become a more mindful eater, not because you suddenly have ironclad willpower, but because your neurochemistry isn't screaming for a dopamine hit from sugar.
You're restoring the natural communication between your gut and your brain, which modern ultra-processed foods tend to sever.
Exactly. And beyond appetite, the psychological benefits of movement include immense increases in vitality, self-efficacy, and autonomous motivation. You build evidence to yourself that you are capable of doing hard things.
Though it is incredibly important, we highlight a caveat the sources provide regarding clinical mental health. We often hear exercise is medicine, but we have to be really precise with the data here.
We do. The systemic review notes that while exercise boosts general mental health and vitality, exercise training programs alone do not independently reduce depression-related outcomes in populations with overweight or obesity.
So you can't just run away from clinical depression.
Framing a jog as a cure-all for clinical depression is biologically inaccurate, and honestly, it sets patients up for devastating false expectations. It is a vital tool for self-efficacy, but it has therapeutic limits and should be part of a broader, clinically supervised mental health strategy.
I really appreciate that nuance. So we've covered the mechanisms. We know how cardio melts the visceral fat, why weights save the muscle, and how movement rewires the gut hormones. The final piece of this puzzle is your actual tomorrow. How do you put this into practice without immediately burning out?
The barrier to entry has to be low, which is why walking remains the gold standard for aerobic accessibility. The fast walking source we reviewed outlines a surprisingly effective 4-step mechanical warm-up. It seems basic, but it systematically prepares the joints and the central nervous system.
I've always been guilty of just sprinting out my front door completely cold.
Most people are.
But this routine makes physiological sense. Step 1 is simply walking in place. You turn on music, find the beat, and establish your rhythm. It's the baseline you return to if you ever get winded.
Right. And then step 2 introduces side steps, moving laterally to the beat.
Which is critical because walking is purely in the sagittal plane, just forward and backward.
Exactly. Side steps engage the lateral stabilizers in the hips, the gluteus medius, waking up the muscles that keep your pelvis level. This is what prevents knee and lower back pain down the road.
Step 3 is kicks. Just easy, low forward kicks.
Yeah.
I have to admit, doing low kicks in my driveway feels a bit ridiculous, but the instructor emphasizes it's about putting juice in the joints.
And biologically, that juice is synovial fluid. The knee is a synovial joint. When you do low kicks without load, you are gently compressing and releasing the joint capsule, which stimulates the synovial membrane to secrete fluid.
It's literally oiling the hinge before you ask it to bear your full body weight for 3 miles.
Exactly.
Okay, that completely justifies the driveway kicks. And the final warm-up step is knee lifts. You lift the knees while maintaining a long, tall posture, specifically engaging the core by pulling the belly button toward the spine.
Which activates the transverse abdominis. Once the engine is oiled and running, we look at the volume required for the actual program. For general health, the baseline is 30 to 60 minutes, 5 to 7 days a week.
Okay, that's doable.
However, the data presents a harsh reality regarding weight maintenance. If you have already lost a significant amount of weight and your goal is purely to keep it off, the volume requirement jumps to at least 250 minutes of moderate intensity exercise per week.
250 minutes. That is essentially 5 days a week of 50-minute sessions. That is no longer a hobby, that is a major lifestyle architectural shift.
It is a serious commitment.
And how do you measure moderate intensity without buying an expensive smartwatch to track heart rate zones?
Right.
A leisurely stroll through a museum doesn't count, right?
No, museum strolling doesn't cut it. The most reliable zero technology metric is the talk but not sing rule.
Oh, I love this one.
It precisely correlates with the ventilatory threshold, where you are reaping the maximum aerobic benefits. During your walk, your breathing should be labored enough that you could hold a conversation with someone next to you, but you absolutely could not sustain the breath required to sing a song.
So if you are gasping and can't complete a sentence, dial it back. If you can belt out a chorus, speed up.
It's the perfect biological speedometer. But knowing the mechanics and actually doing it are two entirely different beasts. We have to address the behavioral architecture of adherence.
Yeah, how do we actually stick to this?
Well, this raises an important question. How do we design an environment that makes failure difficult? The science points to specific intervention strategies. If you prefer digital interventions like apps or wearables, the data shows they are only highly effective when they utilize strict goal setting and graded tasks.
Like hitting a step count or unlocking a sequential tier, it gamifies the dopamine response.
Exactly. But if you are doing a face-to-face intervention, the mechanism of success is totally different. Working with a trainer or a walking group relies on what the researchers call behavioral practice and rehearsal.
It's the physical, repeated modeling of the habit with another human being.
Yes, it's the social contract of knowing someone is waiting for you at the park. Programs like the Walk Across Texas event thrive because they leverage team-based social accountability. You aren't just letting yourself down, you're letting your team down.
But there's a deeper psychological truth the sources uncover about motivation itself. People wait for motivation to strike. They think they need to feel a burning desire to exercise before they lace up their shoes. But the research proves that autonomous motivation is actually built by the act of participating.
Action precedes motivation. The hardest part of the entire 12-week program is literally the first 10 steps out the front door. Once the body is in motion, the catecholamines rise, the blood flows, and the self-efficacy begins to build itself.
You do not have to want to do it before you start. You just have to start, and the brain's chemistry will follow.
You just have to start.
Let's recap this massive shift in perspective we've explored today. We have to stop bowing down to the bathroom scale because the true life-saving magic of exercise happens deep inside the abdominal cavity.
Yep.
We learned exactly how a brisk, talk but not sing walk releases the catecholamines that hunt down and melt away toxic visceral fat, dropping blood pressure and clearing out the liver.
And we covered the biological imperative of resistance training, not to build a bodybuilder's physique, but to provide the mechanical tension necessary to stop your body from consuming its own lean muscle tissue during a calorie deficit.
And we dismantle the appetite paradox, proving that exercise doesn't turn you into a ravenous monster, but rather physically alters your gut hormones, suppressing ghrelin and boosting peptide YY to help your brain register fullness faster and tune out the siren song of hyperpalatable junk food.
It's a total system upgrade.
You, listening to this right now, possess the actual mechanisms of human metabolism. You know why the driveway kicks lubricate your joints, and you know why the first step is the hardest.
You have the evidence-based blueprint to build a fundamentally stronger, more resilient biological house.
So we want to leave you with one final thought to mull over today. If the ultimate metric of a successful workout isn't the calories burned on the smartwatch display, and it isn't the pounds lost on that plastic scale in your bathroom.
Wait, I thought we weren't doing ellipses.
Right, let me rephrase. If it isn't the pounds lost on the scale, but rather how thoroughly it improves your invisible cardiometabolic engine and dampens your hedonic cravings, how might that change the way you judge your very next 30-minute walk? The next time you lace up those shoes, remember, you aren't punishing yourself for a bad diet. You are chemically fine-tuning a masterpiece. Until the next deep dive, take care of yourselves.